Hello and welcome to Sleepy Philosophy. Tonight, we're drifting into the ancient wisdom of Wu Wei, a concept so simple yet profound that it has guided sages for over 2,000 years. This is the art of effortless action, the secret of flowing with life rather than fighting against it. So settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, maybe nestled under your favourite blanket, as we explore how doing less can actually accomplish more. Before we begin our gentle journey into Taoist wisdom, if you find these quiet philosophical explorations helpful for unwinding your mind, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to Sleepy Philosophy. It helps other seekers of wisdom find their way here. And just out of curiosity, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment with your location and the time where you are. I love seeing how this little corner of contemplation reaches across continents and time zones, whether it's midnight in Melbourne or 3 a.m. in Madrid. Now, I do hope this exploration isn't too stimulating. After all, the goal here is peaceful reflection. But if you find yourself still awake by the time we reach the deeper mysteries of effortless action, well, at least you'll drift off with some ancient wisdom to ponder. So take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, and allow yourself to sink a little deeper into wherever you're resting. The ancient Taoists have been waiting patiently for centuries to share their secrets, and they've mastered the art of patience. We can take our time. Picture this: a master archer stands before a target, bow in hand. But instead of straining and forcing the shot, gripping the bow with white knuckles and holding his breath, he becomes still. His breathing settles into a natural rhythm. His grip softens, and when the moment is right, without effort or force, the arrow flies true to its mark. This, in essence, is Wu Wei. Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, is perhaps one of the most misunderstood concepts in Eastern philosophy. It doesn't mean sitting idly by while life happens around you. It doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. Instead, Wu Wei is about finding that sweet spot where action feels natural, where effort becomes effortless, where you work with the current of life rather than swimming against it. The ancient Chinese character for Wu Wei literally means without forcing. Imagine water flowing down a mountainside. It doesn't struggle to find its path. It doesn't fight the rocks or curse the obstacles. Instead, it finds the most natural route, moving around barriers, sometimes carving through stone not by force, but by persistent, gentle flow. The water accomplishes its journey to the sea, not through aggression, but through yielding, not through resistance, but through acceptance of what is. This is the essence of Wu Wei, and it's a principle that can transform how you approach everything from your daily work to your relationships, from your creative endeavors to your personal growth. But to truly understand Wu Wei, we need to step back and look at the broader Taoist understanding of how the universe operates. In Taoist philosophy, everything in existence follows the Tao, which we might think of as the natural way of things, the underlying pattern that governs all of life. The seasons change not because they force themselves to change, but because change is their nature. A tree doesn't strain to grow, it simply grows according to its inherent pattern, responding to sunlight, rain, and the nutrients in the soil. A bird doesn't labour to sing at dawn. The song arises naturally from its being. Humans, however, have developed this peculiar habit of swimming against the current. We've convinced ourselves that more effort always equals better results, that struggling is virtuous, that if something isn't difficult, it can't be worthwhile. We grip our goals tightly, muscle our way through challenges, and exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes that might come naturally if we simply learned to align ourselves with the flow of life. Consider for a moment how a skilled musician plays. A beginner might tense up, gripping the instrument tightly, forcing each note with rigid precision. But watch a master at work, and you'll see something entirely different. Their fingers move with fluid grace, each note emerging not from force but from deep understanding and natural flow. The music seems to play itself through them. This is Wu Wei in action. Or think about a conversation where everything just clicks. You're not forcing words or struggling to make points. The dialogue flows naturally, ideas building upon each other, insights arising spontaneously. There's no strain, no effort to impress or convince. The conversation has its own life, and you're simply participating in its natural unfolding. Again, this is Wu Wei, but how do we cultivate this effortless action in our daily lives? How do we move from forced effort to natural flow? The first step is understanding what creates resistance in the first place. Most of our struggle comes from our relationship with what the Taoists call the 10,000 things, meaning all the circumstances, events, and conditions of life. We develop strong preferences about how things should be, and when reality doesn't match our expectations, we resist. We push against what is, trying to bend circumstances to our will. This resistance is what creates the sense of struggle and effort in our lives. Wu Wei begins with acceptance, but not the passive kind of acceptance that gives up or resigns itself to suffering. Rather, it's an active acceptance that says, this is what's happening right now. How can I work with this reality rather than against it? It's like a skilled sailor who doesn't fight the wind but uses it, adjusting the sails to harness its power regardless of which direction it's blowing. This doesn't mean we become doormats or abandon our goals. Instead, we learn to pursue our objectives in harmony with the natural rhythms and patterns of life. We become sensitive to timing, to the subtle cues that tell us when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to step back. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbours came to console him, saying, "What terrible luck." But the farmer simply replied, "We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it a herd of wild horses. The neighbours congratulated the farmer on his good fortune, but again he said, "We'll see." The next day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses and broke his leg. "What bad luck," said the neighbours. "We'll see," replied the farmer. Soon after, soldiers came to the village to conscript young men for the army, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. "How fortunate," exclaimed the neighbours. And what did the farmer say? "We'll see." This story captures the essence of Wu Wei perfectly. The farmer doesn't resist what happens or try to force outcomes. He remains centered and responsive, neither celebrating nor lamenting, but simply flowing with whatever circumstances arise. He understands that life has its own intelligence, its own way of unfolding, and that fighting this natural flow only creates suffering. But practicing Wu Wei doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or indifferent. The Taoists weren't advocating for numbness or detachment from life. Instead, they were pointing toward a way of being that's both deeply engaged and profoundly at ease. You can care deeply about something while still holding it lightly. You can pursue your goals with passion while remaining flexible about the path. Think of it this way. Imagine you're walking through a crowded marketplace. You have a destination in mind, but you don't plow through the crowd, shoving people aside. Instead, you weave naturally between the moving bodies, adjusting your path as needed, sometimes pausing to let others pass, sometimes quickening your pace when space opens up. You reach your destination not through force, but through fluid adaptation to the ever-changing conditions around you. This is how Wu Wei works in practical life. You maintain your direction while staying responsive to the moment-to-moment reality of your circumstances. You learn to distinguish between the essential and the non-essential, between what you can influence and what you must accept. One of the most profound aspects of Wu Wei is how it transforms our relationship with time. When we're forcing and struggling, time seems to drag. Minutes feel like hours when we're pushing against resistance. But when we're in flow, aligned with the natural rhythm of what we're doing, time seems to disappear. Hours can pass like minutes when we're engaged in effortless action. This isn't just a subjective experience, it reflects a deeper truth about how we function at our best. When we're fighting against our natural rhythms, forcing ourselves to work when we need rest, or trying to be creative when our minds are tired, we create internal friction that drains our energy and reduces our effectiveness. But when we learn to work with our natural patterns, honoring our need for both action and rest, engagement and reflection, we tap into a source of sustainable energy and creativity. The ancient Taoists observed this pattern not just in human behavior, but throughout the natural world. They noticed that everything in nature follows cycles of expansion and contraction, activity and rest, growth and dormancy. Trees don't try to grow in winter. They conserve their energy and wait for spring. Rivers don't force their way uphill. They follow the path of least resistance while still reaching the sea. This cyclical understanding is crucial to practicing Wu Wei. It means recognizing that there are times for action and times for stillness, times for speaking and times for listening, times for pursuing and times for allowing. Wisdom lies in sensing which phase you're in and aligning your actions accordingly. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that constant action is virtuous, that we should always be doing something productive. But Wu Wei teaches us that strategic inaction can be just as powerful as action, sometimes more so. Knowing when not to act, when to wait for the right moment, when to let situations ripen naturally, this is profound wisdom. Consider a gardener who understands Wu Wei. They don't try to force plants to grow faster by pulling on them. Instead, they create the right conditions, plant at the appropriate time, water when needed, and then trust the natural intelligence of growth to do its work. They act when action is needed and rest when rest serves the garden better. This same principle applies to every area of life. In relationships, Wu Wei might mean knowing when to speak your truth and when to listen deeply, when to offer advice, and when to simply be present. In creative work, it might mean recognizing when to push through resistance and when to step back and let ideas percolate. In personal growth, it might mean understanding when to challenge yourself and when to practice self-compassion. The beauty of Wu Wei is that it makes life easier without making you lazy, more effective without being aggressive, more successful without being stressed. It's about finding that place where your personal energy aligns with the larger currents of life, where your individual will harmonizes with the deeper intelligence of existence. But developing this capacity takes practice and patience. We've been trained to believe that more effort always leads to better results. So learning to trust in effortless action can feel counterintuitive at first. It's like learning to float in water after years of thrashing to stay afloat. The key is gradual relaxation, slowly letting go of the need to control every outcome. As we continue exploring these ancient teachings, we'll discover how to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when we're in harmony with the Tao and when we've fallen into the trap of forcing. We'll learn practical techniques for cultivating effortless action in specific areas of life, and we'll explore how this ancient wisdom can transform not just what we accomplish, but how we feel about the process of living itself. The Taoists understood something profound, that the universe is inherently supportive of life, that there's a natural intelligence woven into the fabric of existence that we can learn to work with rather than against. Wu Wei is simply the practice of aligning ourselves with this deeper current, of learning to dance with life rather than wrestling it to the ground. So as you rest there, breathing softly, perhaps feeling your body settling deeper into relaxation, know that you're already practicing a form of Wu Wei. You're not forcing sleep to come, you're creating conditions that allow rest to arise naturally. This is the essence of effortless action, the secret that the ancient sages discovered and that we're rediscovering together, one gentle breath at a time. Now let's explore how we can begin to recognize when we're swimming against the current versus when we're flowing with it. The ancient Taoists were master observers of subtle energies and patterns, and they developed a keen sensitivity to what they called the signs of alignment. When you're practicing Wu Wei, certain unmistakable qualities emerge in your experience. There's a sense of timing that feels almost magical, Doors open just when you need them to. Conversations arise naturally. Opportunities present themselves without force or manipulation. It's not that life becomes problem-free, but rather that challenges feel workable, like puzzles with solutions rather than insurmountable walls. You might notice that your breathing becomes naturally deeper when you're in flow. Your shoulders drop without conscious effort. There's a quality of presence that doesn't require strain to maintain. Actions feel appropriate to the moment, neither rushed nor delayed. Words come easily in conversations, and silence feels comfortable rather than awkward. Contrast this with the felt sense of forcing. When we're pushing against the Tao, our bodies tense, our breathing becomes shallow. Time seems to move too slowly or too quickly, never just right. We find ourselves repeating the same ineffective strategies, expecting different results. Conversations feel stilted, creativity feels blocked, and even simple tasks become unnecessarily complicated. The Taoists had a beautiful metaphor for this. They said that forcing is like trying to carve wood against the grain. The knife catches, the wood splinters, and what should be a smooth, satisfying process becomes laborious and frustrating. But when you learn to work with the natural grain of the wood, the knife glides effortlessly, and beautiful forms emerge with minimal effort. This metaphor extends to every aspect of human experience. Each person has their own grain, their natural patterns of energy and inclination. Wu Wei involves learning to read this grain in yourself and others, to sense the direction that wants to emerge rather than imposing arbitrary directions from the outside. Take the simple act of learning something new. When we force learning, we grit our teeth, repeat information mechanically, and exhaust ourselves trying to cram knowledge into our minds. But when we approach learning with Wu Wei, we become curious rather than demanding. We allow understanding to dawn gradually. We trust that comprehension will arise in its own time if we create the right conditions of attention and openness. I remember watching my grandmother knead bread dough when I was young. She had been baking for decades, and her hands seemed to know exactly what the dough needed. Sometimes she would work it vigorously, and sometimes she would barely touch it, letting it rest and rise. She never seemed to struggle or force the process. The bread always turned out perfectly, emerging from the oven golden and fragrant, as if it had always wanted to become exactly what it became. This is the essence of mastery through Wu Wei. When we truly understand something, whether it's baking bread, playing music, or navigating relationships, we develop an intuitive sense of what each moment requires. We learn to respond rather than react, to act from wisdom rather than from habit or fear. But here's where Wu Wei becomes particularly profound. It changes our relationship not just with action, but with desire itself. In our culture, we often think of desire as something that drives us to grasp and accumulate. We want things, so we chase them. We fear losing things, so we cling to them. This creates what the Taoists called the wheel of suffering, an endless cycle of reaching and grasping that never brings lasting satisfaction. Wu Wei offers a different approach to desire. Instead of suppressing our wants or fighting against them, we learn to hold them lightly. We can desire something deeply while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. We can pursue goals passionately while staying open to unexpected paths and possibilities. This might sound contradictory, but think about it this way. When you're desperately thirsty and finally find water, you don't sip it grudgingly or worry about whether you deserve it. You drink naturally, gratefully, allowing the water to satisfy your thirst. The desire is fulfilled not through struggle, but through simple, appropriate action. Wu Wei applies this same naturalness to all of life's desires. We can want love, success, creativity, or peace without the desperate grasping that actually pushes these things away. We can work toward our goals while remaining present to what's actually happening right now, rather than living in a constant state of not yet or if only. This brings us to one of the most practical aspects of Wu Wei, the art of right timing. The Taoists understood that every action has its season, its appropriate moment. A farmer who plants seeds in winter, no matter how perfectly he tends them, will not see them grow. But planted in spring with proper care, those same seeds will flourish naturally. Learning to sense right timing is one of the most valuable skills we can develop. It's about becoming sensitive to the subtle currents of energy in ourselves and our environment. Sometimes the right action is to speak up. Sometimes it's to remain silent. Sometimes we need to act decisively. Sometimes we need to wait and gather more information. This sensitivity to timing transforms how we approach everything. In conversations, instead of rushing to make our point, we learn to sense when someone is ready to hear what we have to say. In creative projects, instead of forcing inspiration, we learn to recognize when our minds are fertile and when they need to lie fallow. In relationships, instead of pushing for intimacy or resolution, we learn to create space for connection to deepen naturally. The ancient sage Lao Tzu, traditionally credited as the founder of Taoist philosophy, described this beautifully when he wrote about the sage who acts without acting. This doesn't mean doing nothing, but rather acting in such harmony with natural patterns that the action feels effortless, almost as if it's happening by itself. Consider how a master chef cooks. They're not passive or uninvolved, but their actions flow seamlessly from one to the next. They taste and adjust, add heat or remove it, all with a timing that seems almost magical. The meal emerges not from force, but from deep understanding of ingredients, techniques, and the natural processes of cooking. This is acting without acting, fully engaged yet effortless. This principle extends to leadership as well. The most effective leaders often seem to do very little, yet somehow everything gets done. They create conditions for others to flourish rather than micromanaging every detail. They influence through presence and wisdom rather than through force or manipulation. Their leadership feels natural, like water finding its course rather than imposed from above. Wu Wei also transforms our relationship with problems and challenges. Instead of attacking difficulties head-on, we learn to approach them with what the Taoists called soft focus. We hold the problem in awareness without immediately jumping to solutions. We allow our unconscious wisdom to work on it while we go about our daily activities. Often the answer comes not through intense thinking, but through relaxed awareness. You've probably experienced this yourself, struggling with a problem for hours, then having the solution pop into your mind while you're walking the dog or taking a shower. This is Wu Wei problem solving, creating space for insight to arise naturally rather than forcing it through sheer mental effort. The Taoists noticed that nature itself operates this way. Trees don't solve the problem of reaching sunlight by growing frantically in all directions. They grow steadily toward the light, adjusting their course as needed, sometimes growing around obstacles rather than through them. Their growth is purposeful, but not forced, directed, but not rigid. This natural intelligence is available to us as well. When we stop fighting against our circumstances and start working with them creatively, we often discover possibilities we never saw while we were struggling. What seemed like an insurmountable obstacle becomes a stepping stone. What felt like a dead end reveals itself as a doorway. The practice of Wu Wei gradually shifts us from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance. When we're constantly fighting for what we want, we operate from the belief that there's not enough to go around, that we have to struggle to get our share. But when we learn to flow with life's natural rhythms, we begin to see that the universe is actually quite generous, that opportunities and resources appear when we're aligned with the deeper currents of existence. This doesn't mean we become passive or that everything comes without any effort. Rather, our efforts become more precisely directed, more effective, and somehow less depleting. We learn to work smarter rather than harder, to find the leverage points where small actions create large results. Think of a skilled archer again. They don't use more strength to hit the target more accurately. Instead, they develop better alignment, deeper focus, more refined technique. The arrow flies true not because of force, but because of harmony, between archer, bow, arrow, and target. Every element works together in perfect coordination. As you lie there now, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to slow and soften, notice how your body knows how to rest without being told. Your heart beats without your conscious direction. Your breath flows in and out without micromanagement. This is Wu Wei in its most fundamental form, the natural intelligence of life, expressing itself through you without effort or strain. The ancient masters understood that this same intelligence that governs your heartbeat and breathing is available to guide your choices, your relationships, your work, and your creative expression. Learning to trust this intelligence, to align with its wisdom rather than overriding it with anxious effort, this is the heart of effortless success. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore specific practices for cultivating Wu Wei in different areas of life, and we'll discover how this ancient wisdom can transform not just what we accomplish, but who we become in the process of living with such graceful ease. But how do we actually begin to embody this ancient wisdom in our modern lives? The Taoists understood that Wu Wei isn't something you simply decide to do one day and then master. It's more like learning to dance with an invisible partner, developing sensitivity to rhythms and movements that aren't immediately obvious to our busy, goal-oriented minds. The first practice the ancient masters recommended is what they called returning to the source. This involves regularly stepping back from the constant doing that fills our days and reconnecting with the deeper stillness from which all action arises. It's like a musician who pauses between notes, understanding that the silence is just as important as the sound in creating beautiful music. You don't need to retreat to a mountain monastery to practice this returning. It can be as simple as taking 3 conscious breaths before checking your phone in the morning, or pausing for a moment before entering a meeting to sense what kind of presence the situation might need. These small moments of reconnection create space for Wu Wei to emerge naturally. Consider how a cat moves through the world. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary tension. When a cat wants to jump onto a high shelf, it doesn't frantically leap and scramble. It sits quietly for a moment, gauging the distance, gathering its energy, and then flows into action with perfect timing and grace. The pause before action is just as important as the action itself. This quality of gathering before acting is central to Wu Wei. In our hyper-connected world, we've become addicted to immediate response. Someone sends an email, and we feel compelled to reply instantly. A problem arises, and we rush toward the first solution that comes to mind. But the Taoists understood that this reactive approach often creates more problems than it solves. Instead, they cultivated what we might call responsive delay. This isn't procrastination or avoidance, but rather a conscious pause that allows wisdom to arise before action. It's the difference between a knee-jerk reaction and a thoughtful response. In that brief space of gathering, we can sense what the situation truly needs rather than simply reacting from habit or fear. I once watched a master gardener working in her greenhouse, and I was struck by how often she would simply stand and observe before doing anything. She would look at a plant for a long moment, sometimes touching the soil, sometimes just breathing in the same space as the greenery. Only then would she water or prune or move a pot to catch better light. Her actions seemed to arise from deep listening rather than from a predetermined plan. This quality of listening is perhaps the most fundamental aspect of Wu Wei, but it's not just listening with our ears. It's listening with our whole being to the subtle currents of energy in any situation. What is this moment asking for? What wants to emerge? What would serve not just my immediate desires, but the greater harmony of all involved? This kind of deep listening transforms our relationships in profound ways. Instead of entering conversations with a fixed agenda, we become curious about what wants to unfold between us and another person. Instead of trying to convince or control, we create space for genuine dialogue to emerge. Often, the most meaningful exchanges happen when we let go of our script and allow the conversation to find its own natural direction. The Taoists had a beautiful phrase for this: listening to the valley spirit. Valleys don't create sound themselves, but they receive and amplify the sounds that arise naturally within them. When we cultivate this valley-like receptivity, we become conduits for wisdom and creativity that seems to come from beyond our individual minds. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing our sense of direction. Rather, it means holding our intentions lightly while staying open to how they might want to manifest. It's like holding the reins of a horse with gentle firmness, providing guidance while allowing the animal's natural intelligence to navigate the terrain. In practical terms, this might mean setting a goal to write a book while remaining open to whether it becomes fiction or non-fiction, a memoir or a how-to guide. It might mean planning a career change while staying alert to unexpected opportunities that arise along the way. The key is maintaining what the Taoists called firm intention with flexible attachment. Wu Wei. One of the most profound applications of Wu Wei is in our relationship with time itself. Modern life often feels like a race against the clock, a constant struggle to fit more activities into an already packed schedule. But the Taoists understood that time has its own natural rhythms, its own seasons and cycles that we can learn to work with rather than against. There are times when our energy naturally wants to expand outward into activity and accomplishment. These are the seasons for initiating projects, for social engagement, for tackling challenging tasks. But there are also times when our energy naturally wants to turn inward, toward reflection and rest and quiet regeneration. Fighting against these natural rhythms creates internal friction and exhaustion. Learning to honor your personal rhythms is like learning to sail with the wind rather than against it. You still reach your destination, but the journey becomes graceful rather than grinding. You might discover that you're naturally more creative in the early morning hours, or that difficult conversations go better in the afternoon when you're feeling more centered, or that certain types of work flow better when you're well rested versus when you're tired. This isn't about becoming rigid or inflexible with scheduling. It's about developing sensitivity to your own natural patterns and working with them whenever possible. A Taoist approach to time management isn't about cramming more into each hour, but about aligning your activities with your natural energy cycles so that everything feels easier and more sustainable. The ancient masters also understood that Wu Wei extends to our relationship with emotions. In our culture, we often try to manage our feelings, to stay positive or push through negative emotions. But the Taoists saw emotions as natural energies that arise and pass like weather patterns. Fighting against them or trying to control them only creates more turbulence. Instead, Wu Wei with emotions involves what they called non-resistance. When anger arises, we don't feed it with more angry thoughts, but we also don't try to suppress it or judge ourselves for feeling it. We simply allow it to be present, observing how it moves through our body and mind like a cloud passing through the sky. Often, emotions that we resist persist, while emotions that we allow tend to flow through us naturally. This doesn't mean acting on every emotional impulse, but rather developing a spacious awareness that can hold whatever arises without being overwhelmed by it. It's like becoming the sky rather than the weather, vast enough to contain storms without being disturbed by them. This emotional Wu Wei transforms how we navigate relationships. Instead of trying to make others feel differently or managing their reactions to us, we learn to stay centered in our own experience while remaining compassionate toward theirs. We can express our truth without needing others to agree with us. We can listen to criticism without automatically defending or attacking. We can love someone without trying to change them. The Taoists observed that most human suffering comes not from difficult circumstances themselves, but from our resistance to those circumstances. They developed a profound practice they called accepting what is while working toward what could be. This isn't passive resignation, but active engagement with reality as it actually exists rather than as we wish it were. This practice might look like acknowledging that your current job isn't fulfilling while taking concrete steps toward finding work that better matches your values. It might mean accepting that a relationship is struggling while still investing in communication and growth. It might mean facing a health challenge with clarity and courage while pursuing appropriate treatment. The key insight is that acceptance doesn't prevent change. It actually makes change more possible. When we stop wasting energy fighting against what's already here, we have more resources available for creating what we truly want. Resistance keeps us stuck in reaction, while acceptance opens us to creative response. As you rest there now, feeling your body growing heavier against whatever surface supports you, notice how you're not forcing relaxation to happen. You're simply creating conditions that allow rest to arise naturally. Your breathing deepens without effort. Your muscles release without being told. This is your body's innate wisdom, expressing itself when you stop interfering with its natural processes. This same principle applies to every area of life. When we stop interfering with our natural wisdom through excessive effort and control, solutions begin to appear. Creativity starts to flow. Relationships become easier. Work feels more meaningful. Not because we've forced these things to happen, but because we've created space for them to emerge organically. The ancient Taoists had a term for this natural unfolding, Ziran, which means self-so or naturally so. It points to the way things want to be when they're not being forced into artificial shapes. A tree grows Ziran when it follows its natural pattern toward light and water. A conversation flows Ziran when both people are truly present and listening. A creative project unfolds Ziran when we trust the process rather than forcing the outcome. Cultivating Ziran in your life means becoming sensitive to what wants to emerge naturally versus what you think should happen based on external expectations or past conditioning. It means trusting your intuitive sense of right timing and appropriate action. It means learning to distinguish between the voice of wisdom and the voice of fear, between genuine inspiration and mere wishful thinking. This discernment develops gradually through practice and attention. The more you experiment with following your natural rhythms and instincts, the more refined your sensitivity becomes. You begin to recognize the subtle difference between actions that flow from alignment and actions that stem from forcing. You develop what the masters called effortless precision. The journey into Wu Wei is itself a perfect example of this principle. You can't force yourself to be effortless. The very attempt creates the tension you're trying to release. Instead, effortless action arises naturally as you practice letting go of unnecessary effort while maintaining clear intention. It's like learning to float in water by gradually releasing the struggle to stay afloat, discovering that the water naturally supports you when you stop fighting it. In our exploration ahead, we'll discover how this ancient wisdom translates into specific areas of modern life, how Wu Wei can transform your work, your relationships, your creative expression, and your overall sense of well-being. We'll learn practical techniques that the masters developed for staying aligned with the Tao, even in the midst of a busy, demanding world. But for now, simply rest in this understanding that you are already perfect at Wu Wei in so many ways. Your heart knows how to beat without your conscious direction. Your breath flows in its own rhythm. Your dreams arise without effort each night. The same intelligence that governs these natural processes is available to guide every aspect of your life when you learn to trust it, to work with it rather than against it. The Taoists understood something that our modern world has largely forgotten, that life wants to work, that there's a natural harmony woven into existence that we can learn to align with. Wu Wei is simply the practice of remembering this harmony and allowing it to express itself through our daily actions and choices. It's the art of becoming a conscious participant in the dance of existence rather than someone fighting against the music. As we continue this gentle exploration, know that each moment of understanding, each glimpse of effortless flow is building your capacity to live with greater ease and effectiveness. The ancient masters are still teaching through these principles, their wisdom as fresh and relevant now as it was thousands of years ago, waiting patiently for us to rediscover what they knew, that the secret to effortless success lies not in doing more, but in learning to be more fully present to what each moment is asking of us. Let's explore how these timeless principles manifest in the specific domains of daily existence, beginning with perhaps the most challenging arena for modern practitioners, our relationship with work and productivity. In our achievement-oriented culture, the workplace often feels like the antithesis of Wu Wei. Deadlines loom, emails demand instant responses, and the pressure to produce measurable results can make the idea of effortless action seem almost laughable. Yet it's precisely in these high-pressure environments that Wu Wei becomes most valuable, offering a way to remain effective without burning out, to achieve more by struggling less. Consider the difference between two approaches to a demanding project. The first approach involves long hours fueled by caffeine and anxiety, forcing solutions through sheer willpower, muscling through obstacles with grit and determination. This might produce results, but at what cost? The stress hormones flooding your system, the creative thinking that shuts down under pressure, the relationships that suffer from your constant state of urgency. The Wu Wei approach looks entirely different. You begin by creating space to understand the project's natural shape, its inherent requirements and constraints. Instead of immediately diving into action, you pause to sense what this particular challenge is asking of you. You notice which aspects feel energizing and which feel draining. You pay attention to your natural rhythms of focus and creativity. Perhaps you discover that your mind is sharpest in the morning hours, so you protect that time for your most complex thinking. Maybe you realize that certain types of problems resolve themselves better when you step away from your desk and take a walk. You might notice that collaboration flows more smoothly when you approach colleagues with genuine curiosity rather than with a predetermined agenda. This isn't about working less or lowering your standards. It's about working in harmony with your natural capacities and the inherent intelligence of the task itself. A skilled craftsperson doesn't force wood into unnatural shapes. They work with the grain to reveal the form that wants to emerge. Similarly, Wu Wei in work means sensing what each project wants to become and aligning your efforts with that natural direction. The ancient Taoists observed that water, the softest of all elements, can carve through the hardest stone, not through force, but through persistence combined with yielding. When water encounters a boulder, it doesn't stop flowing, it finds another path. When it meets resistance, it pools and waits, building pressure until a way forward opens naturally. This same principle applies to navigating workplace challenges. Instead of meeting obstacles with escalating force, you learn to look for alternative approaches. A difficult colleague might soften when approached with genuine respect rather than defensive confrontation. A seemingly impossible deadline might become manageable when you focus on essential elements rather than trying to perfect every detail. The key insight is that most workplace stress comes not from the work itself, but from our resistance to the conditions under which we're working. When we fight against time constraints, difficult personalities, or imperfect circumstances, we create internal friction that depletes our energy and clouds our judgment. But when we accept these conditions as part of the landscape and work skillfully within them, we often discover resources and solutions we couldn't see while we were struggling. This brings us to one of the most practical applications of Wu Wei, the art of strategic non-action. In our doing-obsessed culture, we often feel guilty about any moment that isn't filled with productive activity. But the Taoists understood that knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing when to act. Sometimes, the wisest response to a workplace conflict is to let it resolve itself naturally rather than jumping in with solutions. Sometimes, a project benefits from a period of incubation rather than immediate execution. Sometimes, the most productive thing you can do is take a genuine break, allowing your unconscious mind to work on problems while your conscious mind rests. This requires developing what we might call productive patience, the ability to discern between avoidance and strategic waiting. Avoidance is driven by fear or resistance. It's a turning away from what needs attention. Strategic waiting, on the other hand, comes from wisdom. It's a conscious choice to allow situations to ripen before acting. A master gardener knows that pulling on a green tomato won't make it ripen faster. The fruit needs time to develop its full flavour and nutrition. Similarly, many workplace situations benefit from allowing natural processes to unfold rather than forcing premature resolution. The timing of action becomes as important as the action itself. This principle extends beautifully into creative work, where Wu Wei becomes almost essential. Creativity, by its very nature, can't be forced. The harder you chase an idea, the more elusive it becomes. But when you create the right conditions, quiet space, playful exploration, freedom from judgment, inspiration often arises spontaneously. Think about the last time you had a genuine creative breakthrough. It probably didn't come while you were straining and pushing for ideas. More likely, it emerged during a moment of relaxed attention, perhaps while washing dishes, walking in nature, or just before falling asleep. This is Wu Wei in creative action, preparing the soil of consciousness and then trusting the natural intelligence of creativity to plant its seeds. Many artists and writers describe their best work as feeling like it came through them rather than from them. They speak of being vessels or conduits for something larger than their individual will. This isn't mystical thinking. It's a recognition that creativity emerges from the intersection of conscious intention and unconscious wisdom. To cultivate this in your own creative endeavours, you might establish regular practices that invite inspiration rather than demanding it. This could mean starting each creative session with a few minutes of quiet attention, approaching your work with curiosity rather than pressure, or creating rituals that signal to your unconscious mind that you're open to receive whatever wants to emerge. The Taoists also understood that Wu Wei transforms our relationship with mistakes and failure. In a forcing mindset, errors are seen as problems to be avoided at all costs. But from a Wu Wei perspective, mistakes are simply information, feedback from reality about what works and what doesn't in any given situation. When you're aligned with natural flow, you make fewer mistakes because you're more attuned to subtle cues and natural rhythms. But when mistakes do occur, you can respond to them as course corrections rather than catastrophes. A river that encounters a fallen tree doesn't interpret this as failure. It simply adjusts its course and continues flowing toward the sea. This attitude toward mistakes creates a profound shift in how you approach learning and growth. Instead of the perfectionism that paralyzes action, you develop what we might call experimental engagement. You try things, notice what happens, adjust accordingly, and try again. Each iteration brings you closer to effective action because you're learning from direct experience rather than trying to think your way to perfect solutions. Now let's turn our attention to how Wu Wei can revolutionize your relationships with others. Perhaps nowhere is the principle of effortless action more immediately applicable than in the delicate dance of human connection. Most relationship difficulties arise from trying to control outcomes we can't actually control. How others feel about us, what they choose to do, how they respond to our words and actions. This creates a constant state of tension and manipulation that prevents authentic intimacy from developing. Wu Wei in relationships means focusing your energy on what you can influence, your own presence, authenticity, and responses, while releasing attachment to specific outcomes from others. It's like tending a garden. You can provide good soil, adequate water, and appropriate sunlight, but you can't force flowers to bloom. You create conditions for beauty to emerge and then trust the natural intelligence of growth. In conversation, this might mean listening with genuine curiosity rather than waiting for your turn to speak. It might mean sharing your truth without needing the other person to agree with you. It might mean offering support without trying to fix someone else's problems. I once observed a couple having what could have been a difficult conversation about money. Instead of each person trying to convince the other of their viewpoint, they practiced what looked like conversational Wu Wei. They spoke their concerns honestly, but without attack. They listened with real attention rather than preparing their rebuttals. They allowed moments of silence for understanding to deepen. What struck me most was how they seemed to trust the conversation itself to find its natural resolution. They weren't forcing agreement or rushing towards solutions. They were creating space for mutual understanding to emerge. By the end, they hadn't necessarily changed each other's minds, but they had deepened their appreciation for each other's perspectives. This approach works because it recognizes a fundamental truth about human nature. People naturally want to connect and cooperate when they don't feel pressured or manipulated. When you approach others with genuine respect for their autonomy, they often become more open and responsive. When you stop trying to change them, they often feel safer to change themselves. The Taoists had a beautiful metaphor for this. They said that true influence is like the moon's effect on water. The moon doesn't grab the ocean and pull it towards shore. It simply maintains its presence, and the water responds naturally to its gravitational field. Similarly, when you embody genuine presence and authenticity, others often find themselves naturally drawn toward harmony with you. This doesn't mean being passive or avoiding difficult conversations. Wu Wei in relationships includes knowing when to speak truth clearly and when to remain silent, when to offer comfort and when to allow someone to work through their own challenges, when to engage and when to create space. The key is learning to distinguish between helpful intervention and controlling interference. Helpful intervention arises from genuine care and wisdom. It offers what's truly needed without attachment to specific outcomes. Controlling interference arises from anxiety or ego. It tries to manage others' experiences to make ourselves feel better. This distinction becomes particularly important in close relationships with family members, romantic partners, and friends. The people we care about most are often the ones we most want to help, but our help can easily slide into control if we're not careful. Wu Wei teaches us to love with open hands, offering our presence and support, while respecting others' right to make their own choices and learn from their own experiences. As you practice these principles, you might notice that your relationships begin to feel less effortful and more nourishing. Conversations flow more naturally. Conflicts resolve more easily. People seem more willing to be authentic with you because they sense that you're not trying to manipulate or change them. This same quality of non-forcing presence can transform your relationship with challenging people. Instead of meeting aggression with aggression or withdrawal, you can practice what the Taoists called soft resistance. Or, like water encountering a stone, you don't fight the obstacle directly, but you don't allow it to stop your natural flow either. With a consistently critical person, this might mean listening to any valid feedback they offer while not absorbing their negativity. With someone who tries to provoke arguments, it might mean staying centered in your own experience while not taking the bait. With a manipulative individual, it might mean maintaining clear boundaries while not engaging in power struggles. The beauty of this approach is that it often disarms difficult behavior naturally. When someone's aggression meets soft strength rather than rigid resistance, they often lose interest in maintaining the conflict. When manipulation encounters clear, non-reactive boundaries, it tends to dissipate. Not because you fought against these behaviors, but because you've removed the resistance they depend on to maintain themselves. Perhaps most importantly, Wu Wei in relationships includes your relationship with yourself. Many of us have developed habits of internal force and struggle, constantly pushing ourselves to be different than we are, fighting against our natural rhythms and inclinations. The Taoist approach to self-development is radically different from the self-improvement industry's typical approach. Instead of trying to force yourself into an idealized version of who you think you should be, You begin by accepting who you actually are right now. From this foundation of self-acceptance, natural growth and change can occur. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or abandoning your aspirations. Rather, it means working with your existing nature rather than against it. If you're naturally introverted, instead of forcing yourself to be more social, you might focus on deepening the quality of your existing relationships. If you tend toward anxiety, instead of fighting the worry, you might learn to channel that sensitivity into greater awareness and compassion. The Taoists understood that every apparent weakness contains the seed of a corresponding strength, and every strength carried to excess becomes a weakness. The goal isn't to eliminate parts of yourself, but to find balance and appropriate expression for all aspects of your nature. This self-acceptance paradoxically accelerates genuine growth because you're no longer wasting energy fighting against yourself. When you stop resisting your natural tendencies, you can begin to work with them skillfully. The anxious person can become the wise counselor who understands suffering. The angry person can become the passionate advocate for justice. The sensitive person can become the artist who touches others' hearts. As you lie there now, breathing softly in whatever quiet space holds you, notice how your body continues its endless processes of renewal and repair without your conscious effort. Your immune system fights infections, your cells regenerate, your dreams process the day's experiences, all without struggle or strain. This same intelligent organizing principle that governs your physical being is available to guide your psychological and spiritual development when you learn to trust it rather than override it with anxious effort. The ancient masters knew that human beings, like all natural phenomena, have an inherent tendency toward health, growth, and harmony when the conditions are right. Wu Wei is simply the practice of creating those conditions in your daily life, conditions of acceptance, presence, and skillful action that allow your deepest wisdom to emerge and express itself naturally. In the continuing portion of our journey, we'll explore how these principles apply to some of the most challenging areas of modern life, dealing with change and uncertainty, navigating financial decisions, and maintaining equilibrium in an increasingly chaotic world. We'll discover how the ancient art of effortless action can provide a stable foundation, even when everything around us seems to be shifting and unstable. The ancient Taoists had a profound understanding of something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover, that our relationship with change and uncertainty determines much of our suffering or peace. They lived through wars, famines, political upheavals, and personal losses, yet they developed practices that allowed them to remain centered even in the midst of chaos. The secret they discovered was that fighting against change is like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands. Change is the fundamental nature of existence. The seasons cycle, our bodies age, relationships evolve, careers shift, and circumstances constantly rearrange themselves around us. Wu Wei teaches us to flow with these changes rather than exhausting ourselves in futile resistance. But this flowing with change doesn't mean becoming a passive leaf blown about by every wind. Instead, it means developing what we might call dynamic stability, the ability to remain centered in your essential being while adapting skillfully to changing circumstances. Think of a tree in a storm. Its roots remain anchored deep in the earth, while its branches bend and sway with the wind. The tree survives not by being rigid, but by combining deep stability with surface flexibility. This same principle applies to navigating life's inevitable transitions. Whether you're facing a job loss, a relationship ending, a health challenge, or simply the gradual changes that come with growing older, Wu Wei offers a way to move through these experiences with grace rather than desperation. The key is learning to distinguish between what the Taoists called the changing and the unchanging within yourself. Your circumstances may shift dramatically, but your capacity for awareness, compassion, and wisdom remains constant. Your external roles may evolve, but your essential being continues uninterrupted. When you anchor yourself in these unchanging qualities, you can navigate any amount of surface change without losing your center. I once knew a woman who lost her job of 20 years due to company restructuring. Instead of immediately panicking or frantically searching for identical employment, she practiced what she later described as strategic stillness. For IT, she gave herself time to grieve the loss, to reflect on what had brought her joy in her work and what had felt burdensome. She used the transition as an opportunity to reassess her values and priorities. Rather than grasping desperately for the first available position, she remained open to possibilities she hadn't previously considered. Eventually, she found work that better matched her evolving interests and allowed for more creativity than her previous role. The change that initially felt devastating became a gateway to greater fulfillment, but only because she approached it with Wu Wei principles rather than panic and force. This brings us to one of the most challenging applications of effortless action: dealing with financial stress and material concerns. Money carries enormous emotional charge in our culture. It represents security, freedom, status, and survival itself. The fear of not having enough can drive us into frantic activity that actually undermines our ability to make wise financial decisions. Wu Wei with money begins with recognizing that your true security doesn't come from the numbers in your bank account, but from your ability to respond wisely to whatever circumstances arise. This doesn't mean being careless with resources or failing to plan for the future. Rather, it means holding your financial goals with appropriate seriousness while not allowing money fears to dominate your peace of mind. The Taoists observed that attachment to outcomes often prevents us from seeing opportunities that are right in front of us. When we're desperately focused on making money in one particular way, we might miss other avenues that would be more natural and sustainable. When we're paralyzed by fear of financial failure, we may avoid taking the very risks that could lead to greater prosperity. Wu Wei in financial matters means taking appropriate action, budgeting, saving, investing wisely, developing valuable skills, while remaining emotionally unattached to specific outcomes. You plant seeds through your efforts, but trust that the harvest will come in its own time and form. You prepare diligently while staying open to unexpected sources of abundance. This approach often leads to what seems like financial synchronicity. Opportunities appear just when they're needed. Resources become available through unexpected channels. Work that aligns with your values also proves to be financially viable. But these coincidences aren't really mysterious. They arise naturally when you're acting from clarity rather than desperation, when you're aligned with your authentic interests rather than chasing money for its own sake. The ancient masters also understood that true abundance isn't just about accumulating resources, but about appreciating what you already have. When you're constantly focused on what's missing or what you need to acquire, you live in a state of perpetual scarcity, regardless of your actual circumstances. But when you practice genuine gratitude for your current blessings, you often find that you have more than enough to live with contentment and even joy. This doesn't mean settling for less than you deserve or avoiding legitimate financial planning. It means recognizing that your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on external circumstances. A person with Wu Wei can be content whether wealthy or modest in means because their happiness isn't contingent on material conditions. Now, let's explore how these principles apply to maintaining inner equilibrium in our increasingly overwhelming world. We're bombarded with information, demands, notifications, and stimulation at levels that would have been unimaginable to the ancient Taoists. Yet their insights remain remarkably relevant for navigating modern complexity. The key insight is that most of our overwhelm comes not from the external stimulation itself, but from our internal response to it. We try to process every piece of information, respond to every demand, and maintain awareness of every crisis happening around the globe. This creates a state of chronic mental agitation that prevents us from accessing our deeper wisdom. Wu Wei in the modern world requires what we might call conscious filtering. Just as your body has an immune system that automatically filters out harmful substances while allowing beneficial ones to pass through, you need to develop a psychological filtering system that protects your mental and emotional well-being. This might mean designating specific times for checking news and social media, rather than allowing these inputs to interrupt your day randomly. It might mean learning to distinguish between urgent and important, responding to true priorities while allowing less significant demands to resolve themselves or find other solutions. It might mean saying no to commitments that don't align with your deeper values, even when those commitments seem worthwhile in isolation. The ancient Taoists had a practice they called returning to simplicity, 一手开口. In a world that constantly encourages complexity, accumulation, and stimulation, they regularly returned to basic, essential experiences. They would spend time in nature, engage in simple physical activities, practice periods of silence, and focus on fundamental human needs, like rest, nourishment, and connection. This returning to simplicity isn't about rejecting modern life or becoming a hermit. Rather, it's about regularly reconnecting with what truly matters, so that you don't lose yourself in the endless complexity that surrounds you. When you're anchored in simple, essential experiences, you can engage with complexity when necessary without being overwhelmed by it. Think of it like a musician who practices scales regularly. The scales themselves aren't the goal. They're a foundation that allows the musician to play complex pieces with ease and fluidity. Similarly, regular practice of simplicity creates a foundation of inner stability that allows you to navigate complex situations with greater skill and less stress. One of the most powerful applications of Wu Wei is in dealing with difficult emotions and psychological states. Our culture often approaches uncomfortable feelings like enemies to be defeated or problems to be solved. We try to think our way out of sadness, force ourselves to be positive when we're grieving, or suppress anger because we judge it as inappropriate. But the Taoists understood that emotions are natural energies that arise and pass like weather patterns. Fighting against them only creates more turbulence. Instead, Wu Wei with emotions involves allowing them to be present without being overwhelmed by them, neither suppressing nor amplifying them, but simply witnessing their natural movement through your awareness. This doesn't mean wallowing in negative emotions or acting on every feeling that arises. Rather, it means developing the capacity to hold whatever you're experiencing with compassionate awareness. When you stop fighting against difficult emotions, they often transform naturally. Anger might reveal itself as hurt or fear underneath. Sadness might open into acceptance or even gratitude for what was lost. This emotional Wu Wei requires practice and patience. We've been conditioned to believe that we should feel good all the time, that negative emotions are signs of failure or weakness. But the ancient masters knew that the full spectrum of human feeling is natural and necessary. Joy is sweeter when you've known sorrow. Peace is more precious when you've experienced anxiety. Courage only exists in the presence of fear. Learning to flow with your emotional weather creates a profound shift in your relationship with life itself. Instead of constantly trying to manage and control your internal experience, you begin to trust the natural intelligence of your psyche to process whatever arises. This trust allows you to remain present and responsive even during difficult periods, rather than getting lost in resistance and struggle. The practice extends to physical sensations as well. Most of us have developed habits of tensing against discomfort, holding our breath when stressed, or trying to force our bodies into states they're not ready for. Wu Wei with your physical being means listening to your body's wisdom, honouring its need for rest when tired, movement when stagnant, nourishment when hungry. This bodily awareness becomes a gateway to deeper wisdom. Your body often knows what you need before your mind figures it out. A tight feeling in your chest might signal that a decision doesn't align with your values. A sense of expansion in your heart might indicate that you're moving in the right direction. Learning to read these subtle physical cues provides invaluable guidance for navigating life's choices. The Taoists also recognized that Wu Wei includes your relationship with time itself. Modern life often feels like a race against the clock, a constant pressure to do more faster. But the ancient masters understood that each moment has its own natural pace, its own appropriate rhythm. Forcing activities to happen faster than their natural timing often reduces their quality and effectiveness. This doesn't mean moving slowly through everything or missing important deadlines. Rather, it means sensing the natural pace that each activity wants to unfold at and working with that rhythm rather than against it. Some tasks benefit from quick, decisive action. Others require patient cultivation over longer periods. Wisdom lies in sensing which approach serves each situation. When you align with natural timing, you often accomplish more with less effort because you're working with the inherent intelligence of each process rather than imposing artificial timelines. A conversation reaches its natural conclusion without being rushed or prolonged unnecessarily. A creative project develops at its own pace, producing better results than if forced to completion prematurely. This temporal Wu Wei also applies to life phases and personal development. There are seasons for learning and seasons for applying knowledge, times for building and times for harvesting, periods of intense activity and periods of rest and integration. Trying to force yourself to be in a different phase than you actually are creates internal friction and often slows genuine progress. As you rest there now, perhaps feeling your eyelids growing heavier, your thoughts beginning to drift like leaves on a gentle stream, you're practicing one of the most fundamental forms of Wu Wei, the art of allowing sleep to come naturally. You're not forcing unconsciousness or fighting against wakefulness. You're simply creating conditions that invite rest while trusting your body's natural wisdom to guide the transition. This same trust, this same gentle allowing, can infuse every aspect of your daily experience. Work can become more like play when you stop forcing outcomes and start collaborating with the natural intelligence of each task. Relationships can become more harmonious when you focus on your own authentic presence rather than trying to control others' responses. Personal growth can accelerate when you work with your existing nature rather than fighting against it. The ancient Taoists discovered something that remains as true today as it was thousands of years ago: that life wants to work, that there's a natural flow and intelligence woven into existence that we can learn to align with rather than struggle against. Wu Wei is simply the practice of remembering this flow and allowing it to guide our actions and choices. This isn't passive or lazy. It's actually a more refined and effective way of engaging with life. Like a master martial artist who wins through superior positioning and timing rather than brute force, Wu Wei allows you to accomplish your goals with greater ease and sustainability. You become more effective while feeling less stressed, more productive while maintaining better relationships, more successful while preserving your peace of mind. The journey into effortless action is itself a perfect example of these principles. You can't force yourself to be more natural or struggle your way into ease. Instead, Wu Wei develops gradually through gentle practice and patient attention. Each moment of recognizing when you're forcing becomes a moment of potential flow. Each time you catch yourself swimming against the current becomes an opportunity to find a more natural way forward. As we near the end of our exploration together, know that these ancient teachings aren't meant to be understood once and then forgotten. They're living principles that reveal deeper layers of meaning as you experiment with them in your daily life. The Taoists understood that wisdom isn't something you acquire, but something you remember. Not something you force, but something you allow to emerge from the depths of your own being. The path of Wu Wei transforms not just what you accomplish, but who you become in the process. Instead of a person constantly struggling against life, you become someone who dances with existence itself. Instead of exhausting yourself fighting for what you want, You learn to create conditions that allow your deepest desires to manifest naturally. Instead of forcing your way through obstacles, you develop the fluid intelligence to find pathways that serve everyone involved. This ancient art of effortless success isn't about achieving more with less effort, though that often happens. It's about discovering a way of being that feels sustainable, joyful, and deeply aligned with the fundamental patterns of life itself. When you're living in harmony with the Tao, success doesn't feel like conquest, but like coming home to who you've always been, beneath the layers of struggle and strain. The masters of old had a saying that when you truly understand Wu Wei, you realize you've been practicing it all your life without knowing it. Every breath you take happens without conscious effort. Your heart beats in perfect rhythm without micromanagement. Your body heals cuts and bruises through processes you don't consciously control. These are all expressions of effortless action, the natural intelligence that operates beneath the surface of your everyday awareness. But somewhere along the way, we learn to override this natural intelligence with mental effort and conscious control. We began to believe that struggle equals virtue, that if something doesn't require force, it can't be valuable. We developed the peculiar notion that we need to manage every aspect of our experience, from our thoughts to our emotions to our circumstances. The Taoists observed this human tendency with compassionate amusement. They saw how we exhaust ourselves trying to control what naturally wants to flow, like someone standing in a river trying to direct each water molecule by hand. They understood that most of our suffering comes not from difficult circumstances, but from our relationship to those circumstances, not from what happens, but from our resistance to what's happening. This insight leads us to one of the most profound applications of Wu Wei, the practice of what ancient masters called yielding to win. This isn't about giving up or becoming a doormat. Rather, it's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful response to opposition is non-resistance. Like the way water defeats rock, not through hardness, but through persistent softness. Consider how a skilled negotiator operates. Instead of meeting demands with counter-demands, creating an escalating cycle of resistance, they might acknowledge the other party's concerns while gently introducing alternative perspectives. They create space for solutions to emerge rather than forcing predetermined outcomes. Often, this approach leads to agreements that serve everyone better than what either party originally imagined. This yielding to win extends to internal conflicts as well. When you're struggling with a difficult decision, the harder you think, the more confused you often become. Your mind generates endless pros and cons lists, but clarity remains elusive. Wu Wei suggests a different approach. Hold the question lightly in your awareness, while engaging in simple, present-moment activities. Often the answer arrives not through mental analysis, but through a quiet knowing that emerges from deeper wisdom. The ancient texts describe this as the valley spirit, the receptive awareness that doesn't create answers, but provides space for them to arise naturally. Like a valley that doesn't generate sound, but allows echoes to resonate clearly, this quality of open attention allows solutions to reveal themselves. I once watched a craftsperson working with a piece of wood that had an unusual grain pattern. Instead of imposing a predetermined design, they spent long minutes simply observing the wood, feeling its texture, understanding its natural tendencies. When they finally began carving, their tools seemed to follow the wood's own inclinations. The finished piece was more beautiful than anything they could have planned, because they collaborated with the material's inherent nature, rather than forcing it into an artificial shape. This collaborative approach to life challenges one of our deepest cultural assumptions, that we are separate from our environment and must therefore control it to survive. But Wu Wei reveals a different possibility, that we are part of an interconnected web of intelligence that we can learn to participate in rather than dominate. When you're aligned with this larger intelligence, coincidences begin to feel less coincidental. You think of someone and they call. You need information and it appears in an unexpected conversation. You're looking for an opportunity and it presents itself through a chance encounter. These synchronicities aren't mystical. They're the natural result of being attuned to the subtle currents of connection that surround us always. This attunement requires what the Taoists called empty awareness, a quality of attention that's alert but not grasping, present but not controlling. It's like the difference between a spotlight that illuminates one small area intensely and natural sunlight that gently reveals everything without strain or effort. Most of us have been trained to use spotlight consciousness, focusing intensely on problems and goals while missing the broader context that might hold more elegant solutions. Empty awareness allows you to perceive the whole situation, including possibilities that narrow focus would miss entirely. This shift in attention naturally leads to what ancient masters described as action without attachments. You can work diligently toward your goals while holding the outcomes lightly. You can care deeply about results while remaining unshaken by setbacks. You can pursue success while finding fulfillment in the process itself, rather than only in achievements. The paradox is that this non-attachment often leads to better results than desperate grasping. When you're not emotionally dependent on specific outcomes, you can see situations more clearly and respond more appropriately. You're free to adjust your approach based on feedback, rather than rigidly pursuing strategies that aren't working. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. The harder you grip the handlebars, and the more desperately you try to maintain balance, the more likely you are to wobble and fall. But when you relax your grip and trust your body's natural sense of equilibrium, balance emerges effortlessly. The same principle applies to virtually every skill and every life situation. This trust in natural balance extends to your emotional life as well. Instead of trying to maintain constant happiness or avoid all discomfort, you can learn to trust your psyche's natural tendency toward equilibrium. Difficult emotions, when neither suppressed nor amplified, tend to process themselves and resolve into greater wisdom and compassion. The Taoists had a beautiful practice they called returning to the uncarved block, The uncarved block represents your original nature before it was shaped by social conditioning, expectations, and learned patterns of struggle. It's not that you need to become someone different, but rather that you need to remember who you were before you learn to complicate everything. This original simplicity isn't naive or unsophisticated. It's the refined simplicity that emerges on the other side of complexity. Like a master who makes difficult techniques look effortless because they've integrated years of practice into natural flow. You can glimpse this original nature in moments when you're fully absorbed in an activity you love. Time seems to disappear. Self-consciousness fades away. Actions arise spontaneously without internal debate or hesitation. You're not trying to be anyone or prove anything. You're simply being present to what's unfolding through you. These moments of natural flow point toward the possibility of living this way more consistently, not through forcing or trying harder, but through gradually removing the barriers that block your natural responsiveness to each moment's requirements. One of the most significant barriers is what the ancient masters called the comparing mind, the mental habit of constantly measuring yourself against others or against idealized versions of who you think you should be. This comparison creates a chronic sense of inadequacy that drives endless striving and prevents you from appreciating your unique gifts and natural way of being. Wu Wei dissolves comparison not through positive thinking, but through direct recognition that each person has their own path, their own timing, their own way of expressing the universal intelligence that moves through all life. Your way of being in the world doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be valuable and authentic. This recognition naturally leads to what Taoists called original virtue, the goodness that emerges spontaneously when you're not trying to be good, the compassion that arises naturally when you're not forcing yourself to care, the wisdom that appears when you stop trying to be wise. Original virtue isn't something you develop through moral effort, but something you discover by removing the obstacles to your natural kindness and clarity. Most people are naturally generous when they feel secure, naturally patient when they're not rushed, naturally wise when they're not anxious about appearing intelligent. The practice becomes one of creating internal conditions that allow these natural qualities to emerge rather than trying to manufacture them through willpower. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of Wu Wei, that you become your best self, not through self-improvement, but through self-acceptance, not through adding more good qualities, but through removing what obscures the goodness that's already there. As you lie there now, breathing softly in the quiet darkness, you might notice that your body knows exactly how to rest without being instructed. Your muscles release tension naturally when you stop holding them tight. Your mind begins to quiet when you stop feeding it anxious thoughts. Your heart settles into its natural rhythm when you stop trying to control your emotional state. This same natural intelligence that governs your rest is available to guide your waking activities when you learn to trust it rather than override it with excessive mental effort. The ancient Taoists discovered that this intelligence isn't limited to biological processes, but extends to every aspect of human experience when we align ourselves with its flow. The alignment doesn't require perfect understanding or flawless execution. Like learning to dance, it's about gradually becoming more sensitive to the rhythm that's already playing, more responsive to the movement that wants to emerge, more trusting of the partnership between your individual will and the larger choreography of existence. Sometimes the dance requires quick, decisive movement. Sometimes it calls for stillness and patience. Sometimes you lead and sometimes you follow. The wisdom lies not in having a predetermined plan, but in remaining present to what each moment is asking of you. This presence transforms everything it touches. Work becomes more like play when you're fully engaged with the task at hand, rather than thinking about what comes next. Conversations become more meaningful when you're listening with your whole being, rather than preparing your next response. Even mundane activities like washing dishes or walking to the store can become opportunities for practicing this quality of present moment awareness. The Taoists understood that enlightenment isn't a special state reserved for mystics and sages, but the natural result of living with complete presence and acceptance. When you stop fighting against reality and start collaborating with it creatively, life becomes your teacher and every experience becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding. This understanding isn't intellectual, but experiential, arising from direct engagement with the principles rather than just thinking about them. Each time you notice yourself forcing and choose to soften instead, you deepen your capacity for effortless action. Each moment of recognizing when you're swimming against the current becomes a chance to find the flow that's always available. The ancient masters were fond of saying that the Tao that can be spoken isn't the true Tao, pointing to the reality that these principles must be lived rather than merely understood conceptually. But they also knew that words could point toward the experience, like fingers pointing at the moon, helping seekers look in the right direction. As our exploration draws toward its natural conclusion, know that you carry within yourself everything necessary to live with this effortless grace. The same intelligence that beats your heart and grows your hair and dreams your dreams is fully capable of guiding your choices and actions when you learn to listen to its subtle promptings rather than drowning them out with mental noise. The journey into Wu Wei is really a journey home to your own deepest nature, to the part of you that has never forgotten how to flow with life rather than fighting against it. This homecoming doesn't require dramatic changes or heroic efforts. It happens through small moments of recognition, gentle corrections in course, and the gradual cultivation of trust in the intelligence that has been supporting your existence all along. Tomorrow, when you wake and begin your day, you'll have countless opportunities to experiment with these principles, not as rigid rules to follow, but as gentle invitations to discover what becomes possible when you stop forcing outcomes and start collaborating with the natural intelligence of each situation. The ancient Taoists are still teaching through these timeless insights, their wisdom as fresh and relevant now as it was thousands of years ago. They understood something that our hurried, goal-obsessed culture has temporarily forgotten: that life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced, not a mountain to be conquered, but a river to be navigated with skill and grace. And in the end, the greatest success isn't measured by external achievements, but by the quality of presence you bring to each moment, the degree of ease you feel in your own skin, the depth of trust you develop in life's unfolding process. This is the true meaning of effortless success, the ancient secret that becomes available to anyone willing to stop struggling long enough to remember what they've always known, but temporarily forgotten. Rest well, dear listener, knowing that even sleep itself is a perfect teacher of Wu Wei, showing you how the most essential processes happen naturally when you simply create the conditions and then get out of the way. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow a little more aligned with the effortless flow that has been carrying you all along. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Wu Wei reveals itself when we examine our relationship with desire itself. In our consumer-driven world, we've been conditioned to believe that wanting something means we must chase it relentlessly, that the intensity of our pursuit somehow determines our worthiness to receive what we seek. Yet the ancient Taoists discovered something remarkable. The very act of grasping often pushes away what we most desire to hold. Consider how desperately trying to fall asleep often keeps you awake, how forcing yourself to be creative can block inspiration, how frantically searching for love can repel genuine connection. There's a quality of desperation that creates its own obstacles, a grasping energy that disturbs the very conditions necessary for fulfillment. Wu Wei offers a completely different approach to desire. Instead of suppressing your wants or pursuing them with frantic energy, you learn to hold them with what the masters called passionate detachment. You can care deeply about something while remaining unattached to the specific form it takes or the timeline on which it arrives. Imagine a gardener who plants seeds with great care and attention. They provide good soil, adequate water, appropriate sunlight. They tend the garden regularly, removing weeds and protecting young shoots from harsh weather. But they don't dig up the seeds every day to check on their progress. They don't try to force flowers to bloom faster by pulling on them. They understand that growth has its own intelligence, its own perfect timing that can't be rushed. This same principle applies to every area of human longing. Whether you desire a fulfilling career, a loving relationship, creative expression, or inner peace, Wu Wei teaches you to plant the right seeds through your actions, while trusting the natural processes of manifestation to unfold in their own time. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning effort. The gardener works diligently, but their work is aligned with natural cycles rather than fighting against them. They know when to water and when to wait for rain, when to prune, and when to let growth proceed unhindered. Their actions arise from understanding rather than anxiety, from wisdom rather than desperation. In practical terms, this might mean taking concrete steps toward your goals while remaining open to unexpected pathways. You might work diligently to develop skills while staying alert to opportunities that require different talents than you originally planned to use. You might pursue one relationship while remaining available to connections that emerge naturally through shared interests or mutual friends. The key insight is that the universe often has more creative solutions than our limited perspective can imagine. When we grasp too tightly to specific outcomes, we may miss opportunities that would serve us better than what we originally thought we wanted. But when we hold our desires lightly while taking appropriate action, we create space for possibilities we never could have planned. I once knew a musician who spent years trying to break into the commercial music industry, sending demos to record labels and performing at clubs hoping to be discovered. The harder she tried, the more frustrated she became. Finally, exhausted by the struggle, she decided to simply focus on creating music she loved without concern for commercial success. She began sharing her songs online not as a career strategy, but simply to connect with others who might appreciate her work. Slowly, a community formed around her music. People began supporting her directly, commissioning original pieces, inviting her to perform at intimate gatherings. Within a year, she was making more money from her music than she ever had while chasing traditional success, and she was creating exactly the kind of art that brought her joy. Her story illustrates a profound truth about Wu Wei and manifestation. When you align with your authentic nature and express it without forcing outcomes, life often provides support in ways you never expected. This isn't magical thinking, but practical wisdom. When you're doing what genuinely fulfills you, you naturally become excellent at it. When you're excellent at something that serves others, opportunities tend to appear. But this alignment with authentic expression requires honest self-examination. Many of our desires are actually borrowed from others, inherited from family expectations, or adopted from cultural messages about what should make us happy. Wu Wei includes the practice of distinguishing between desires that arise from your deepest nature and those that come from external conditioning. The ancient Taoists had a practice they called returning to original intention. This involves regularly checking whether your current pursuits still align with your core values and genuine interests, or whether you've gotten caught up in momentum that no longer serves your authentic development. Sometimes, this examination reveals that you've been climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. You may have achieved considerable success in a direction that doesn't actually fulfill you. Wu Wei provides the wisdom to change course without seeing the previous efforts as wasted. Every experience contributes to your understanding, even detours that seem to lead away from your ultimate destination. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of practicing effortless action, dealing with the opinions and expectations of others. When you begin living according to your own natural rhythms, rather than external pressures, some people may not understand or approve. They may interpret your refusal to force outcomes as laziness, your acceptance of natural timing as lack of ambition. Wu Wei requires developing what we might call centered independence, the ability to remain true to your own wisdom while staying compassionate toward those who operate differently. You don't need to convince others of your approach or defend your choices. You simply need to trust your own experience and continue following the path that feels most alive and authentic for you. This trust deepens as you accumulate evidence that Wu Wei actually works. You begin to notice that decisions made from a place of inner stillness tend to work out better than those made from anxiety or pressure. Relationships that develop naturally feel more sustainable than those forced through effort and manipulation. Creative projects that emerge from genuine inspiration bring more satisfaction than those driven by external goals. These experiences gradually build what the Taoists called faith in the Tao, not blind belief, but empirical trust based on repeated observation that life has an intelligence that exceeds your individual planning and control. This isn't about becoming passive, but about learning to dance with forces larger than yourself. The dance metaphor is particularly apt because it captures the dynamic quality of Wu Wei. You're not standing still, but moving responsively. Not controlling the music, but finding your unique expression within its rhythms. Sometimes you lead, and sometimes you follow, but you're always engaged, always present to what the moment is asking of you. This dynamic responsiveness transforms how you approach challenges and obstacles. Instead of meeting difficulties with rigid resistance, you learn to move like water around rocks, finding pathways that serve your ultimate direction while honoring the reality of current conditions. Consider how a river handles obstacles in its path. It doesn't stop flowing when it encounters a boulder. It doesn't waste energy trying to move the stone through force. Instead, it finds the most efficient route around the obstacle, sometimes carving new channels that become more beautiful than the original streambed. You can apply this same fluid intelligence to any situation that feels stuck or blocked. A career plateau might become an opportunity to develop new skills or explore different directions. A relationship conflict might reveal deeper issues that, once addressed, lead to greater intimacy. A health challenge might inspire lifestyle changes that ultimately improve your overall well-being. The key is shifting from "this shouldn't be happening" to "this is what's happening. How can I work with it creatively?" This shift doesn't mean resigning yourself to unacceptable situations, but rather approaching them with the kind of strategic wisdom that finds solutions others might miss. This wisdom often emerges from what the ancient masters called beginner's mind, the quality of approaching familiar situations with fresh eyes, as if seeing them for the first time. Beginner's mind prevents you from getting trapped in habitual responses that may no longer serve the current circumstances. When you don't know how something should be done, you're more likely to discover innovative approaches that work better than conventional methods. When you're not limited by assumptions about what's possible, you may find pathways that others overlook because they seem too simple or unconventional. I remember watching a child trying to reach a toy that had rolled under a couch. Instead of getting frustrated or asking for help, she simply lay down on the floor and looked at the situation from that angle. From her new perspective, she could see exactly where the toy was and retrieve it easily. Her beginner's mind found a solution that adults might have missed because we'd be thinking about more complicated approaches. This childlike wisdom is always available when you approach situations without preconceptions about how they should be handled. Wu Wei includes cultivating this quality of openness and curiosity that allows creative solutions to emerge naturally. The practice also extends to your relationship with time and aging. Our culture often treats growing older as a defeat, something to fight against rather than flow with gracefully. But the Taoists understood that every life phase has its own gifts and appropriate activities. Fighting against the natural progression of life creates suffering, while embracing each stage allows its unique wisdom to emerge. A young person naturally has the energy for exploration and experimentation. Middle age might bring the stability and resources needed for deeper commitments and contributions. Later years often provide the perspective and freedom to focus on what truly matters. Wu Wei means honoring the gifts of whatever phase you're currently experiencing, rather than trying to hold on to qualities that belong to a different time. This doesn't mean accepting decline or giving up on growth and vitality. Rather, it means understanding that different types of growth become available at different life stages. The wisdom you can develop at 60 is different from but not less valuable than the physical vigor you enjoyed at 20. The ancient texts speak of sages who remained vital and creative throughout long lives because they worked with their natural energy rather than against it. They adapted their activities to their changing capacities while maintaining their essential engagement with life. They aged like fine wine, becoming more refined and valuable with time rather than simply older. This principle of working with natural cycles applies not just to life phases, but to daily and seasonal rhythms as well. Your energy naturally fluctuates throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year. Wu Wei includes honoring these rhythms rather than trying to maintain constant productivity regardless of your natural energy levels. You might discover that you're most creative in the early morning hours, most social in the afternoon, most reflective in the evening. Instead of fighting these patterns, you can structure your activities to take advantage of them. This doesn't mean becoming rigid about schedules, but rather becoming sensitive to the optimal timing for different types of activities. Seasonal awareness adds another layer to this practice. Many people naturally feel more introspective during winter months, more active during spring, more social during summer, more contemplative during autumn. Instead of judging these shifts or trying to maintain the same energy year-round, you can allow your activities and focus to ebb and flow with natural cycles. This attunement to natural rhythms often leads to what feels like effortless productivity. When you're working with your natural energy patterns rather than against them, You accomplish more with less strain. Quality improves because you're operating from alignment rather than force. The Taoists observed that nature never hurries, yet everything is accomplished in perfect timing. Trees don't struggle to grow, yet they reach impressive heights. Seasons don't rush, yet they complete their cycles reliably. This same unhurried effectiveness becomes available when you align with the natural intelligence that governs all life processes. But perhaps the deepest application of Wu Wei involves your relationship with suffering itself. The ancient masters understood that pain is unavoidable in human life, but suffering is optional. Pain is what happens when circumstances are difficult. Suffering is what happens when you resist the pain, fight against reality, or tell yourself stories about how things should be different. Wu Wei with suffering means allowing difficult experiences to be present without adding the extra layer of resistance that transforms pain into prolonged anguish. When you're going through a loss, a disappointment, or a challenging situation, the experience is already difficult enough without the additional burden of fighting against what's happening. This doesn't mean becoming passive in the face of problems that can be solved or situations that can be improved. Rather, it means distinguishing between what can be changed and what must be accepted, then directing your energy appropriately. Sometimes the wisest action is to work diligently toward solutions. Sometimes it's to adapt gracefully to circumstances beyond your control. The Serenity Prayer captures this wisdom beautifully. Grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This discernment between changeable and unchangeable circumstances is central to practicing Wu Wei skillfully. When you stop fighting against unchangeable realities, remarkable transformations often occur. Energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available for creative response. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation, but rather clear-eyed engagement with what is, which often reveals possibilities that weren't visible while you were struggling against the facts. As you rest there now, feeling your body settling deeper into whatever supports you, notice how you're not fighting against tiredness or forcing wakefulness. You're allowing the natural transition towards sleep to unfold at its own pace. Your breathing deepens without conscious direction. Your thoughts begin to drift and soften without effort on your part. This same natural intelligence that guides your transition into sleep is available to navigate every aspect of your waking life when you learn to trust it rather than override it with anxious control. The ancient Taoists discovered that this intelligence isn't separate from you, but is your deepest nature, the wisdom that beats your heart and dreams your dreams and knows exactly what each moment requires. Wu Wei is simply the practice of remembering this deeper intelligence and allowing it to express itself through your daily choices and actions. It's the art of becoming a conscious participant in the dance of existence, rather than someone fighting against the music. This remembering happens gradually, through countless small moments of choosing flow over force, presence over pressure, trust over control. Each time you notice yourself gripping too tightly and consciously soften your hold, you deepen your capacity for effortless action. Each moment of recognizing when you're swimming upstream becomes an opportunity to find the current that's always flowing toward your highest good. The ancient masters knew that this wisdom couldn't be forced or hurried, but would emerge naturally as you created the right conditions through patient practice and gentle attention. They understood that enlightenment isn't a destination to be reached, but a quality of presence that becomes available whenever you stop struggling long enough to remember what you've always known, but temporarily forgotten. Tomorrow, when you wake and begin another day, you'll have countless opportunities to experiment with these principles. Not as rigid rules to follow perfectly, but as gentle invitations to discover what becomes possible when you align with the intelligence that has been supporting your existence all along. The Taoists are still teaching through these timeless insights, their wisdom as relevant now as it was millennia ago. They point toward a way of living that feels both profoundly effective and deeply satisfying, where success arises not from struggle, but from harmony, not from force, but from flow, not from fighting life, but from dancing with it in ever greater grace and ease. And so, as your eyelids grow heavy and your thoughts begin to scatter like dandelion seeds on a gentle breeze, know that you carry within yourself everything necessary to live with this effortless mastery. The same power that moves the stars and changes the seasons lives within you, waiting patiently for you to remember how to move in harmony with its infinite wisdom. Rest well, knowing that even now, as you drift towards sleep, you're practicing the deepest teaching of Wu Wei, the art of allowing what needs to happen naturally, without force or strain, trusting in the intelligence that has been guiding you all along and will continue to do so through every moment of your unfolding journey. The morning sun filters through ancient bamboo groves, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Somewhere in this tranquil scene, a master calligrapher sits before a blank scroll, brush poised in perfect stillness. She doesn't strain to create the perfect character or force inspiration to arrive on schedule. Instead, she breathes quietly, allowing her awareness to settle like sediment in still water, waiting for the moment when movement arises naturally from the depths of concentrated peace. When that moment comes, the brush moves with fluid precision, each stroke emerging not from conscious planning, but from years of practice that have dissolved into pure expression. The characters that appear seem to write themselves, flowing from some source deeper than individual will or technique. This is Wu Wei in its most refined form, where mastery becomes so complete that it appears effortless, where skill transcends struggle to become a form of natural grace. But you don't need to be a master calligrapher to access this same quality of effortless precision. It's available in the simplest activities when you learn to approach them with the right kind of attention. Making your morning coffee can become a meditation in present moment awareness. Folding laundry can become a practice in mindful movement. Walking to your car can become an opportunity to feel your feet connecting with the earth and your lungs filling with whatever air surrounds you. The key is bringing what the ancient Taoists called wholehearted attention to whatever you're doing, regardless of how mundane it might seem. When you're washing dishes, you're not thinking about the meeting later or replaying yesterday's conversation. You're simply present with the warm water, the smooth surface of the plates, the rhythm of cleaning and rinsing that has connected humans across cultures and centuries. This quality of presence transforms the most ordinary activities into gateways for deeper understanding. You begin to notice subtleties that were invisible when your mind was elsewhere. The exact pressure needed to clean effectively without wasting energy. The natural rhythm that makes the work feel almost musical. The satisfaction that comes not from finishing the task, but from being fully engaged with the process itself. Modern neuroscience has begun to understand what the ancient masters knew intuitively, that this kind of focused, non-anxious attention actually changes your brain in measurable ways. The networks associated with stress and rumination quiet down. Areas linked to present moment awareness and emotional regulation become more active. Your nervous system shifts from the chronic activation that characterizes so much of modern life into the calm alertness that allows for both peak performance and deep rest. This physiological shift is one reason why Wu Wei often feels so immediately rewarding. Your body recognizes the return to its natural state of relaxed effectiveness. Tension you didn't even realize you were carrying begins to dissolve. Breathing deepens spontaneously. The constant background noise of mental chatter subsides, replaced by a quality of alert stillness that feels both energizing and peaceful. But developing this capacity requires what we might call practical patience. In our instant gratification culture, we expect results immediately. We want to download enlightenment like an app or achieve mastery through a weekend workshop. But the ancient arts of consciousness develop according to their own timeline, like wine aging or trees growing towards sunlight. The Taoists understood that impatience itself is a form of forcing that prevents the very results we're seeking. When you're constantly checking your progress or comparing your current state to some imagined future achievement, you're not actually present to the process that creates genuine transformation. It's like trying to watch grass grow or demanding that a flower bloom faster by staring at it intently. Instead, Wu Wei includes what masters called cultivation without attachment to harvest. You water the garden of your consciousness through regular practice, but you don't dig up the seeds every day to measure their progress. You trust that growth is happening even when it's not immediately visible, just as you trust that your hair is growing even though you can't perceive the daily changes. This cultivation happens through what might seem like very simple practices: taking 3 conscious breaths before getting out of bed each morning, pausing for a moment of silence before meals to appreciate the nourishment you're about to receive, walking the first few steps of any journey with deliberate awareness of the ground beneath your feet. These micro practices may seem insignificant, but they create what ancient masters called accumulated presence. Each moment of conscious awareness builds upon previous moments, gradually establishing new patterns of attention that begin to operate automatically. You start noticing beauty you previously overlooked. Conversations become more satisfying because you're actually listening. Simple pleasures become more vivid because you're present to receive them. One of the most profound shifts that emerges from this practice is a different relationship with difficulty itself. Most of us have been conditioned to view challenges as problems to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But Wu Wei reveals that difficulties often contain essential information or opportunities for growth that can only be accessed through patient engagement. Consider how a river responds to a fallen tree across its path. The water doesn't become frustrated or anxious about the obstruction. It doesn't waste energy trying to move the tree through force. Instead, it explores the situation with fluid intelligence, finding ways to flow around, over, or even under the obstacle. Sometimes this exploration creates new channels that become more beautiful and efficient than the original stream bed. You can bring this same quality of creative exploration to any challenging situation in your life. A difficult relationship might be asking you to develop better communication skills or clearer boundaries. A health problem might be inviting you to examine lifestyle patterns that no longer serve your well-being. A career setback might be redirecting your energy toward opportunities that better match your evolving values and interests. The key is shifting from "why is this happening to me?" to "what is this situation asking me to learn or develop?" This doesn't mean that all difficulties are beneficial or that you should passively accept harmful conditions. Rather, it means approaching challenges with the kind of creative intelligence that looks for growth opportunities within difficult circumstances. This perspective naturally leads to what Taoists called skillful response, rather than reactive behavior. When someone criticizes you harshly, instead of immediately defending or counterattacking, you might pause to consider whether there's any useful feedback hidden within their harsh delivery. When a project doesn't go as planned, instead of spiraling into self-blame or frustration, you might examine what the experience teaches about planning, communication, or adapting to unexpected variables. Skillful response requires developing what we might call emotional spaciousness, the ability to feel whatever you're feeling without being overwhelmed or controlled by those emotions. This isn't about suppressing feelings or pretending they don't matter. Rather, it's about creating enough internal space to experience emotions fully while maintaining the capacity to choose your response rather than simply reacting automatically. Imagine your emotional life as a vast sky. Feelings arise like weather patterns, sometimes gentle breezes, sometimes thunderstorms, sometimes periods of clear stillness. The sky itself remains unchanged by whatever weather moves through it. Similarly, you can learn to identify with the spacious awareness that contains all emotions rather than with the temporary feelings themselves. This emotional Wu Wei transforms how you navigate relationships with others. Instead of taking every comment personally or feeling responsible for managing other people's moods, you can remain centered in your own experience while staying compassionate toward theirs. You can listen deeply without feeling obligated to fix whatever problems others share with you. You can express your needs clearly without demanding that others meet them in exactly the way you prefer. The ancient masters observed that most interpersonal conflict arises from what they called mutual forcing, each person trying to control the other's responses while resisting being controlled themselves. This creates escalating cycles of pressure and counter-pressure that rarely lead to genuine resolution. Wu Wei in relationships means focusing your energy on being the kind of person you want to be around, rather than trying to make others behave differently. When you embody the qualities you appreciate, patience, kindness, honesty, humor, you naturally inspire those same qualities in others, not through manipulation, but through authentic modeling. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to address important issues. Rather, it means approaching difficult conversations from a centered place rather than from emotional reactivity. You can express disagreement without attacking character. You can set boundaries without punishing others for having different needs. You can work toward resolution while accepting that some conflicts may not have perfect solutions. The practice extends to your relationship with your own personal history and conditioning. Many of us carry patterns of thought and behavior that developed as survival strategies earlier in life, but no longer serve our current circumstances. Wu Wei includes the gentle work of recognizing these patterns with compassion rather than judgment, understanding that they arose for good reasons, even if they're no longer helpful. Instead of fighting against unwanted habits or trying to force yourself to be different through sheer willpower, you can approach personal change the way a gardener tends to weeds. You don't attack the weeds with violence, but you also don't ignore them or pretend they're not there. Instead, you patiently remove them while simultaneously planting and nurturing what you want to grow in their place. This might mean noticing when you're slipping into old patterns of worry or self-criticism and gently redirecting your attention toward more constructive thoughts. It might mean recognizing when you're about to react defensively in a conversation and choosing instead to breathe deeply and listen more carefully. It might mean acknowledging when you're pushing yourself too hard and consciously creating space for rest and renewal. The transformation happens not through dramatic interventions, but through countless small moments of choosing flow over force, presence over pressure, compassion over criticism. Each moment of conscious choice builds what the masters called virtue, not moral superiority, but alignment with your deepest wisdom and most authentic nature. This alignment naturally expresses itself as what we might call effortless ethics. When you're connected to your deeper wisdom, you naturally act in ways that serve not just your immediate desires, but the well-being of the larger whole of which you're a part. You don't need complex moral rules, because your actions arise from an intuitive understanding of interconnectedness. You might find yourself naturally speaking more truthfully because deception requires too much energy to maintain. You might discover that generosity feels better than hoarding because sharing creates connection, while grasping creates isolation. You might notice that patience comes more easily because you're no longer fighting against the natural timing of events. These shifts don't happen through forcing yourself to be good, but through removing the barriers that obscure your natural goodness. Most people, when they feel safe and resourced, naturally want to contribute to others' well-being. Most individuals, when they're not driven by fear or scarcity, spontaneously act with kindness and consideration. The ancient Taoists understood that human beings, like all natural phenomena, have an inherent tendency toward harmony and balance when conditions are right. Wu Wei is partly the practice of creating those optimal conditions in your own consciousness through regular attention to presence, acceptance, and skillful action. But the practice also includes learning to recognize when external conditions aren't conducive to your well-being and taking appropriate steps to address those situations. Wu Wei isn't about passive acceptance of harmful circumstances, but about responding to them with wisdom rather than reactivity. This might mean leaving a job that consistently undermines your health or values, even if the transition involves temporary uncertainty. It might mean ending a relationship that has become destructive despite your best efforts to improve it. It might mean seeking professional help for persistent mental or physical health challenges rather than trying to handle everything alone. The key is distinguishing between situations that call for patient acceptance and those that require decisive action. This discernment develops through experience and honest self-reflection. You learn to recognize the difference between temporary discomfort that accompanies growth and chronic stress that signals the need for change. Sometimes the most powerful action is non-action, choosing not to engage with drama, not to respond to provocation, not to participate in conversations or activities that drain your energy without providing meaningful value. This isn't avoidance or withdrawal, but conscious selection of where to invest your limited time and attention. The Taoists had a saying that the sage acts without attachment to results, but also without attachment to inaction. They understood that different moments call for different responses, and wisdom lies in sensing what each situation actually needs, rather than applying predetermined strategies regardless of context. This sensitivity to what each moment requires naturally develops as you practice present moment awareness. You begin to notice subtle cues that were invisible when your attention was scattered across past regrets and future worries. Body language becomes more apparent. Energy levels fluctuate in response to different people and environments. Natural rhythms of creativity and rest become more distinct. These observations provide invaluable guidance for navigating daily decisions with greater ease and effectiveness. You might discover that certain types of conversations go better in the morning when your mind is fresh, while others benefit from the relaxed atmosphere of evening. You might notice that some challenges resolve themselves when approached immediately, while others need time to ripen before solutions become apparent. This attunement to natural timing extends to larger life decisions as well. There are seasons for beginning new projects and seasons for completing existing commitments, periods when your energy naturally turns outward toward social engagement, and periods when it draws inward toward reflection and renewal. Honoring these larger cycles prevents the burnout that comes from trying to maintain constant productivity regardless of your natural rhythms. It also allows you to contribute your gifts more effectively because you're working with your energy rather than against it. As you rest there now, feeling your body growing heavier against whatever surface supports you, you might notice how your breathing has deepened without any conscious effort on your part. Your heart continues its steady rhythm without requiring your attention or management. Your mind begins to drift toward the threshold between waking and sleeping, following patterns older than conscious thought. This same intelligence that guides your transition into rest operates throughout your waking hours when you learn to trust it rather than override it with anxious control. The ancient masters discovered that this intelligence isn't separate from your individual will, but is your will operating at its deepest, wisest level. Wu Wei is the practice of learning to distinguish between this deeper wisdom and the surface chatter of fear, conditioning, and social pressure. It's the art of making decisions from your center, rather than from the peripheral concerns that often dominate conscious thinking. This centering happens naturally when you create regular periods of stillness and reflection in your daily routine. Not necessarily long meditation sessions, though those can be valuable, but simple moments of conscious pause throughout the day, taking a few breaths before answering the phone, standing quietly for a moment before entering a building, feeling your feet on the ground before starting your car. These micro-meditations create what ancient masters called gaps in the stream of thinking, brief openings where deeper wisdom can emerge. In these gaps, you might receive unexpected insights about challenges you've been facing. Creative solutions might appear for problems you've been struggling to solve. A sense of direction might arise regarding decisions you've been postponing. The key is approaching these moments without grasping for specific results or demanding that profound insights appear on schedule. Like a fisherman who casts his line and then waits patiently for whatever might emerge from the depths, you create conditions for wisdom to arise and then remain open to whatever appears. Sometimes what emerges is practical guidance about immediate concerns. Sometimes it's a broader perspective that helps you see current challenges in a larger context. Sometimes it's simply a sense of peace that allows you to engage with difficulties from a more centered place. All of these outcomes are valuable because they arise from your own deepest knowing rather than from external authorities or predetermined formulas. This doesn't mean rejecting helpful advice from others, but it does mean filtering all input through your own inner compass rather than automatically accepting whatever sounds reasonable or popular. The ancient Taoists understood that each person's path is ultimately unique, even though all paths may lead towards similar destinations of peace, fulfillment, and contribution. What works perfectly for one individual may be completely inappropriate for another, not because either approach is wrong, but because different people have different natures, circumstances, and lessons to learn. Wu Wei includes honoring your own unique way of moving through the world while remaining open to learning from others' experiences and perspectives. You can appreciate someone else's approach without feeling obligated to adopt it wholesale. You can recognize wisdom wherever it appears while trusting your own discernment about what applies to your specific situation. This balance between learning and self-trust naturally leads to what masters called confident humility, the ability to act decisively from your own understanding while remaining open to feedback and course correction. You don't need to know everything before taking action, but you also don't act recklessly without considering likely consequences. Like a skilled sailor who reads wind patterns and weather signs while remaining ready to adjust course as conditions change, you can navigate life's uncertainties with both preparation and flexibility. You make the best decisions possible with available information while staying alert to new data that might suggest different approaches. As we reach the end of our gentle exploration together, perhaps the most beautiful truth about Wu Wei is that you don't need to master it perfectly to begin experiencing its gifts. Like learning to float in water, it's not about getting everything right, but about gradually releasing the struggle that keeps you from discovering what was always naturally available. Tomorrow will bring countless opportunities to practice these ancient principles. Each moment of choosing presence over pressure, each breath taken consciously, each decision made from stillness rather than anxiety becomes a small act of alignment with the effortless flow that has been carrying you all along. Rest well tonight, dear friend, knowing that the same intelligence that beats your heart and dreams your dreams is perfectly capable of guiding your waking choices when you remember to listen. The ancient Taoists are still teaching through these timeless insights, patiently waiting for us to rediscover what we've always known but temporarily forgotten. That life itself wants to work, and we need only learn to dance with its infinite wisdom.